To understand the economy, you have to understand human nature.
This podcast is powered by Acast.
How are you doing there? Time for the podcast. Today we are going to talk about the Middle East. We're going to go straight to the Lebanon. We're going to talk to a Lebanese economist, Carole Nakhle, in a couple of minutes. Get the Lebanese take on what is going on in that country. If you are interested in Lebanon, and you'll be aware that I was there twice over the last 24 months, making the beginning of a documentary about what happens when a country is inflicted by hyperinflation. When I was in Lebanon, one of the most fascinating aspects of the culture, which I wasn't that completely aware of, was just the extraordinary patchwork of ethnicities, of sects, of tribes, of religions. I'll just give you an example. We were shooting in a place called Baalbek, and I cannot recommend this place more highly. It is unbelievably well-preserved Roman city, in effect, which is just on the Syrian border. And it means you have to drive from Beirut to the Syrian border. So right across what you will know as the Bekaa Valley, which is the big valley in the center of Lebanon, from the hilly region around Beirut, outside the city, down to this extraordinary valley, and then back up into the mountains again at Baalbek. And not just the physical beauty of the country, but the extraordinary patchwork of ethnicity. So you'd go through a Maronite Christian area, then you'd go through a Greek Christian area, then you'd go through a Sunni Muslim area, then you'd go through a Palestinian refugee camp, then you go back into a Christian area, and then you would arrive at Baalbek, which was controlled by Hezbollah. And this is all within an hour's drive. So it gives you a sense of the multi-ethnic, multiracial nature of Lebanon, something we don't really ever appreciate unless you go there. And of course, John, I'm just twittering away here, but I told you, remember when I came back from Lebanon, I did tell you just how amazing the place was.
Yeah. And Baalbek was one of those places that Israel was targeting over the last week or so.
Because it's a Hezbollah held area, maybe, or maybe not. Like, who knows? Who knows at this stage?
But what struck me over the last while is that, you know, in the last 10 years, we've had Syria flattened. Now we've had Gaza absolutely flattened. And Lebanon is next on the agenda. And it just feels like there's no end to this. And yeah, you can flatten everything. You can wipe everybody out. But all it succeeds in doing is creating a whole new generation or generations to come of hatred and hostility and conflict. It solves nothing.
And also the other hate, just hurt, of people being hurt. People being emotionally hurt, physically hurt, psychologically hurt. And that goes back into the mix. And as you say, there's no end in sight. But listen, you and I will not solve the Middle Eastern problem.
No.
But just by the way, if you're interested in Lebanon, the late Robert Fisk's book, Pity the Nation, well worth a read. A couple of flaws in it. Maybe people think editorially it's a bit too slanted, but it's really a brilliant read. Anyway, let us go and talk to a wonderful economist, Lebanese, born and bred in a place called Ashrafia in central Beirut. She'll be at Kilconomics. I think once you hear Carole Nakhle speaking, you will not want to miss her live. So let's go and talk to Lebanese economist Carole Nakhle. Now, next month at Kilconomics, we will have a special economist, a special guest from Lebanon. Carole Nakhle was at Kilconomics last year. Her speciality is in oil, commodities, the energy sector in general. Anything you want to know about commodity prices, oil prices, the energy sector, Carole is the go-to economist. But today, I'm going to talk to her about her home country of Lebanon, which is obviously in the news for all the wrong reasons. Those of you who are podcast fans will know I visited Lebanon twice in the last 24 months to make a documentary about how hyperinflation destroys societies. But now it's destroying Lebanon is war. So let's go directly and talk to Carole. Carole, how are you? And lovely to see you.
Lovely to see you too, David. And how am I? Well, I'm quite stressed out because of all the news coming out of my country, Lebanon. But I'll try to keep a brave face, hoping for the better all the time.
So tell me, Carole, you're born and raised in Beirut. Explain to me the Beirut you were born and raised in and what we are seeing now.
The Beirut I was born and raised in was very different from the Beirut that you see today, despite all the news about the wars and the development, because I was born in Ashrafiyeh, which is really at the heart of Beirut, and it was during the Civil War. And all my uncles who looked after me and my brothers were in the militias, in the Christian militia. So I grew up in a very distorted, disturbed, if you want, setting where anyone who was not Christian was bad and deserved to be killed. Lots of tensions. We couldn't really plan for the long term. We were living day by day. We didn't have access to clean water or food, and we had to be quite creative in that respect. But you know what? Overall, I know we had the atrocities and everything, but there was an amazing sense of strong community. So everybody was helping their neighbors or their relatives or their friends. And we don't have that today. So today, apart from what happened since the attacks between Israel and Hezbollah, things have not been that great. We didn't have civil war, but the Lebanese economy has been struggling. People are struggling. You don't want to be misled by what you see on social media, people having fun in nightclubs. We are famous for our nightlife. So even during the civil war, we managed still to go to clubs and party until 6 a.m. in the morning. But really structurally and fundamentally, people are struggling. Then add on top of that what is happening today, the war, Israel attacking Lebanese source, Israel attacking Beirut districts. That is quite a new chapter in the history of Lebanon. Not that Israel did not attack Lebanon before. We saw something similar in 2006. But the level of attacks that we are seeing today, the people who are targeted, their seniority is opening a new chapter for Lebanon. We don't know how that chapter looks like. So there's a great deal of uncertainty and fear currently prevailing in Beirut.
Now, Carole, before we talk about just the last few days and the implications and the possible implications for Lebanon, for Iran, for Israel, for the region, let me just go back a little bit and let's do a little small bit of history as to the Lebanese themselves, because what amazed me, I was aware of it, but not to the extent of the experience when you're there of the various different communities and the size of the various different communities. And of course, when did the Palestinians arrive in Lebanon? How did that change Lebanon? Why are Hezbollah in South Lebanon? Maybe just a quick explanation of that, where the Christians live in and all that sort of stuff.
It's very difficult to pinpoint that on a map because it has been evolving. But typically, you can say that certain areas are dominated by one community. So we all assume that, for example, the south of Lebanon is dominated by the Shias. But that is to a certain extent true, but there is a big Lebanese Christian, Maronite and Catholic and whatever Christian community living in that part of the world. My mother comes from the south of Lebanon and she's Christian Catholic. So there are areas which, you are right, are dominated by certain religious sects, but it's not exclusively for them everywhere around the country. So in Lebanon, we have 17 religious sects, not just about Muslim and Christian, because the Muslims, you have the Shias and the Sunnis, and there are subdivisions between them. Even the Maronite, politically speaking, they are also divided, and there isn't really much love between them. So it's very difficult to say that there is a clear cut between one sect and another. There's a huge division within the country. Now, when you have such a delicate makeup, and also our system, our constitution allocates political roles to your religious sect. So, for example, the president is always Maronite, the prime minister always Sunni, the speaker of parliament always Shia, the head of the army Maronite. But that goes all along all government official appointments. They follow this kind of allocation by your religious sect. And when you have this kind of delicate makeup in a country, any kind of distortion that happens to that delicate makeup can create problems. And I go back because you refer to the Palestinian refugees coming to the country. They were Sunnis primarily coming to the country, that created instability, and many pinpoint to that kind of displacement of the Palestinians coming to Lebanon as one of the main reasons behind the civil war. Then don't forget, we still have a huge number of Syrian refugees in the country, and that created lots of problems within various communities. We saw some locals, Lebanese locals, attacking Syrian refugees because they accuse them of taking their jobs, of committing crimes, all sorts of things. And this has been ongoing. And now today, we're not only talking about people coming from other countries being displaced, but communities within the country are moving from one area to the other. And we saw in the news also like people fleeing in the south of the country and coming to some areas in Beirut, and that has already upset other communities. So it goes back to this really weak equation, which I hope we get rid of at some point, that is allocation of different areas by sect. And there are so many sects that you get confused. You cannot follow anymore who is who in the country. We have these big slogans. Even our TV stations represent different sects, but it's not as clear cut as we would like to put it as Sunnis, Shias, and Maronite. It's much more broken, fragmented than that.
And into this mix, you have your southern neighbor, Israel. And explain to me the relationship. Again, is just sketch the relationship between Israel and Lebanon. I mean, we know the Israelis had a full-scale invasion of Lebanon in 1982, and that has traumatized Lebanon and Israel. But since then, there has been just a constant aggression, counter-aggression, aggression, counter-aggression. Explain that to me.
First, let me highlight that Lebanon has two borders only. It was two neighboring countries. And I should be careful when I talk. Use the word neighbor when I refer to Israel, because officially Israel is an enemy. So Lebanon and Israel are still officially at war with no diplomatic relations. But we have the majority of our borders are with Syria, and then the south is Israel. And we did not only have problems, or we haven't had problems only with Israel. We had our share of Syrian dominance, both on the ground and indirectly via supporting certain political figures in the country and dominating our political scene. And that still continues to date, although perhaps more tamed than what we saw only a few years ago. But we shouldn't forget the other very important neighbor that dictated our politics for decades and also caused their own share of atrocities within the country. But let me also turn to Israel, who's causing the biggest problem. And again, it is the enemy of Lebanon. I'm speaking here as a Lebanese and in line with what we have in the country. That relationship has always been volatile. I know within Lebanon, there are certain factions that are sympathizers of Israel. And I don't want to say that they are for any invasion of Israel, but they feel that they are threatened by other parties, especially Hezbollah in the country, and they are unable to face Hezbollah. So they hope that an external actor will be able to weaken Hezbollah. So again, the way we look at Israel is not clear-cut, because you do have some sympathizers within the country when it comes to Israel, but not because they love Israel, but because they see it as a deterrent to a growing power within the country, that is Hezbollah. Now, Israel, they had several military actions against Lebanon on a bigger scale than just occasional attacks on targeted areas in the south of Lebanon. You mentioned the big invasion in the 80s, but also there was a war in 2006, if I'm not mistaken, when they attacked not only the south of Lebanon, but all along the countries, even Christian areas were attacked. And the whole purpose of that operation back then was to weaken Hezbollah. And I do remember, I'll never forget Condoleezza Rice going on TV and saying, we'll give Israel another 10 days to finish the job. And all the Lebanese get upset, like, what kind of job you're talking about here? And they never finished the job. And as a consequence, while maybe Hezbollah was weak in military, but actually they became more powerful domestically, and with the support from Syria and Iran, that kind of empowered Hezbollah. It became the main actor in Lebanese political scene. And then fast forward a few years later, we had something that shocked me when Lebanon and Israel, two countries that don't have any diplomatic relations, signed a deal on the borders, maritime borders. Usually as an energy expert, I know that these kind of disputes take decades to be resolved, even with countries that are not at war with each other. So what happened between Israel and Lebanon signing the maritime border agreement only a few years ago kind of gave us a bit of false hope that maybe we are moving closer to some kind of a bigger, fully fledged peace deal between the two countries. But then there was the attack, the 7th of October attack, Hamas attacking Israel, and the whole thing escalated. And that was a major setback. And that opened the door for what we are seeing today, with Israel not only attacking very targeted area in the south of Lebanon, but really hitting Hezbollah at full scale. And I don't think they are done yet. And I don't know whether this is only limited to Lebanon or whether it will have a much bigger spillover outside Lebanon as well.
So let's keep that question hanging, the spillover. Let's just explain to me and the listeners, because I was trying to figure this out when I was in Lebanon, is what is Hezbollah?
You should ask the Iranians, right? Because even though, I tell you, what people don't realize actually, and that's why I have to use it as a reminder, Hezbollah was created by Iran. It has been sponsored by Iran for decades and years, but they are Lebanese people. So that's what makes the whole thing quite tricky. That for a Lebanese, I see what upset me about Hezbollah is that their loyalty has not been quite for Lebanon, because they have been loyal to their founder, to their backer, that is Iran. And that I cannot accept, and I struggle to accept it. But at the end, if I take away their military suits and their slogans, they are Lebanese people. So this creates this kind of dilemma and this kind of frustration that on the one hand, you condemn their action because you know that, first of all, there should be only one military power in a country, that is the Lebanese army. This is where our loyalty and respect should be for in terms of a protector of the country from a military perspective. So we cannot accept there is another even more, perhaps more powerful military power acting on behalf of another country and then controlling the fate of my country. But at the same time, I have this dilemma that I was upset, and I'm still upset when I see those military people from Hezbollah, but also their families, their children, their neighbors living in that neighborhood, also getting killed and getting injured. I worry about my brother going almost every day. Now, thank goodness he stopped doing that after I was really upset with him, but he goes to visit poultry farms in the south of Lebanon. If you're attacking Hezbollah, you will end up, when my brother gets killed, what is he going to be? Collateral damage? I don't know. So I have this kind of dilemma towards Hezbollah, but it is an official Iranian entity, but a Lebanese entity. So that's what creates this kind of confusion, perhaps, to the outside observer, because they treat them as Iranians, but actually they are Lebanese so people. I don't want to call them fighters or soldiers, let's say Lebanese people.
Because this is what I wanted to get to. Again, when I was there, it was like, not unlike certain conflicts, everybody paints it's easier, black, white, there's no gray, there's no confusion, there's no fragility, there's the enemy, there's the hero, the villain, all that sort of stuff. And then you go to Lebanon and you talk to lots of Lebanese and say, well, exactly as you've articulated, on the one hand, we support Lebanon, on the other hand, this is a kind of almost like a foreign agent within the country, backed by foreigners, but with Lebanese people. So it makes the whole thing unbelievably complicated. And of course, that's what the Israelis are happy to poke at, because they know it's fragile.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, they understand this dilemma. Also, there's another thing I should mention. We shouldn't forget the economic contribution that Hezbollah does to its own people and that region. We haven't really touched on the economy in Lebanon at great lengths, but Lebanese people have been going through hell. They've been going through hell. We had the massive economic crisis just at the back of COVID. When COVID hit, and I remember the World Bank describing the crisis in Lebanon as one of the biggest in the history of human mankind. And then followed by that, the horrible explosion at the port of Beirut. So it was like a crisis souffle, one hit after the other, and that drained the Lebanese people. But the areas where Hezbollah dominates and is a main actor, you can see how they kind of pampered their own people compared to other communities. And that gave some kind of economic security to the Shia community, to the followers of Hezbollah. So it's the power of Hezbollah was not just because they have the weapons and the rockets, but also they kind of filled a major gap that was supposed to be provided by the government, by the main authorities in the country. But Hezbollah supported its people economically throughout the most difficult times. And I do remember my mother saying that maybe she should move to the south to live within the Hezbollah community because she was really struggling to find the basic food that she needed for her day-to-day life. So there is this the other layer, the social and the economic dimension that we should add to Hezbollah's involvement and role in Lebanon.
Now, what struck me when I was in Lebanon was inflation. The currency had fallen by 96% against the euro and the dollar, and every major currency, and of course against oil and against every commodity. Once the currency was destroyed, how did the Lebanese lira become so worthless in such a quick period of time?
Well, I remember when I was a very tiny little girl that when we used to use one Lebanese lira, which is like £1, we used to buy lots of things. It was, I remember, a big brown piece of paper, and it was a big treat to get £1. That has disappeared long time ago. Then we moved on to 1,000 Lebanese pound, and it was for years, for many years, every 1,500 Lebanese pound or lira would buy you $1. This doesn't exist anymore. So if you have, for example, the 150,000 Lebanese pound, that would buy you maybe at best a small piece of chocolate or maybe a bag of sugar. So the depreciation of the currency has gone through massive periods. We did have a long period of stability, but turned out to be a false stability and a big Ponzi scheme run by several people in Lebanon, especially the banking sector. And it's not just the depreciation of the currency, but if you have an account in a Lebanese bank before the crisis hit a few years ago, then you now forget about it. You cannot access that money. At best, you may be able to withdraw $200 per month, but at a horrible exchange rate, the old exchange rate. So whatever money you have doesn't have any more value in your account. So you have inflation, you have horrible depreciation of the currency. So if you were paid, and lots of people like the Lebanese military personnel, they are paid in Lebanese pound, then their salaries, if they were not inflated, then they are really struggling. Lots of people are struggling. And third, if you had any savings in your bank account, then you should forget about them. You don't have access to those savings. So that is a massive economic struggle. If it wasn't for the Lebanese diaspora, people like me who are sponsoring their families back home, we always send them cash. Whoever is going to Lebanon, we send them, cash with them, or you can open what we call fresh dollar account. Let's not go into that because it's too horribly complicated. Then I think Lebanon would have disappeared a long time ago. But thanks to the Lebanese diaspora, who goes to Lebanon despite the war, who went there over the summer, supported local industries and tourism, and are sending money to their relatives in the country, I don't think Lebanon would have still be standing on its feet today.
It's an extraordinary tale. And the amazing thing is, Carole, the Lebanese diaspora all over the world and going back over 100 years are probably the most successful, or one of the most successful commercial diasporas in the world. If you go to Latin America, so many of the uber wealthy people, uber influential people are Lebanese. Even if you go to West Africa, they're Lebanese. I mean, the Lebanese, all the way back to the Phoenicians, have been the traders of the Mediterranean.
Yes, but that creates what we call in economic terminology adverse selection, because we don't have opportunities for people in Lebanon, for people to grow, unless you are connected to X or Y, or your father or your mother are in a certain post. And that has worsened over the years. So what happened, you have the really capable people, the skilled people leaving the country and seeking opportunities elsewhere and growing elsewhere and succeeding elsewhere. I mean, look, what the lesson that we learned throughout the Civil War, how you can easily adjust to great uncertainty. I mean, I've been living in the UK since 98, and once we had a power cut in our building, my neighbors panicked and freaked out, and phone calls and here and there knocking on the door. I I just went in and continued what I was doing normally because I had the resilience and, if you want, the training from the civil war. So there is a lot of resilience within the Lebanese people. The problem when we go abroad, when we grow personally and career-wise, we still have our heart is still back in that country. And that creates further frustration to the Lebanese diaspora living abroad. But the problem is that you end up having with much less qualified people running the country. And that's why you hear about a lot of corruption. It's not transparency. I always tell people, don't tell me about transparency. I see all these NGOs and think tanks. They want to have more transparency. I say, everybody knows what's happening in the country. Yeah, we all know who's doing what, who's stealing what, who is in that job because of who. But there is no accountability. And when you don't have accountability in a country, that is the worst scenario that you want to have. I don't want to live in a country that doesn't have accountability. And just to put it into perspective, the biggest explosion in Lebanon, the port of Beirut, how many people end up being held accountable for that? How many people end up in jail? As far as I know, almost nobody. And that tells you a lot about the lack of accountability. So who is qualified that is out there would like to go and invest their energy and money and intellect in a country that does not give them the basic protection and accountability? I don't want to be there.
Well, I mean, this is a conversation that I've had with a number of Lebanese people outside, that you're absolutely right. You know, it's the heart is saying, go back, invest, spend your time, but your head is saying it has become so corrupted inside. And of course, all the non-Lebanese players, the Israelis, the Syrians have been involved and occupied the country for a long, long time, which people tend to forget. Now, let's just leave the internal machinations of Lebanon and let's look at Lebanon as a symbol of the Middle East right now and as a fault line in the Middle East and as a launch pad for war in the Middle East. And of course, what the Israelis are doing right now in Lebanon. How do you think, what are the options for the Middle East after this? How do you think this will play out? Because as you said a couple of minutes ago, this is unique. This is not normal. This is a new phase, as the Israelis said, and it comes against the background of Gaza and it comes against the background of Iran being involved. So explain to me how it might pan out.
Earlier today, somebody sent me a message and we were discussing Lebanon, where he's saying like, oh, what happened? Oh my goodness. And that friend told me it's part of a much bigger game or potential deal between the US, Iran, and Israel. And I didn't buy that for several reasons, partly because if that is true, what is happening now in Lebanon is allowed to happen, and Lebanon is part of a deal that Iran is involved in, then Iran will lose all kind of influence it has across the region. And Iran's influence in the region is not limited to Hezbollah. They also support Hamas. They support the Houthis. They have their own supporters in Iraq. We shouldn't forget Iraq as well, which changed entirely after the removal of Saddam Hussein and became very close to Iran. They would also lose their influence in Syria. So there is the Iranian influence in the region goes well beyond Lebanon. So whatever the outcome of what's happening now in Lebanon is going to influence Iranian role across the Middle East. So when you bring Iran, you have to also think about the other actors in the region, the Gulf countries who don't have such a great relationship with Iran, despite the Chinese attempt to bring them together. And the fact that the dynamics in the region also change with the Abraham Accord and countries such as the UAE signing this agreement with Israel. And ironically, that did not create some major outcry in the region, but it created also some tensions that go all the way to Morocco, for example, where I met people condemning what the UAE has done. So what's happening in Lebanon is on a very big scale relatively to the size of the country, but its implications will go well beyond the borders of Lebanon because of the big actors involved outside Lebanon. If Israel's problem was limited to Hezbollah, that would have been over a long time ago, because Hezbollah is just a small group of people coming together with some rockets. But you have to think about Syria. I'm amazed that nobody's talking about Syria anymore. It was in the main headlines not long time ago, and still it's not settled, and still it's fragmented, and still we see people there with divergent interest on the ground, but doesn't make headline news anymore. Libya is not settled in North Africa. Also, Gaza ongoing, Yemen and the Houthis and the Red Sea. So I'm trying to just highlight the complexities, the web of complexities that we have. And at the moment, yes, Lebanon is the center, but the web of the spider goes across the whole Middle East and North Africa, and also include Israel as part of this equation. And mind you, I want to widen the discussion not only to the actors in the region. What about the Americans? What about the Russians? The Russians are very comfortable sitting in Syria, and they have built lots of strong economic relations within the region with the GCC, whether it's through OPEC Plus or through investments from their sovereign wealth fund. The Chinese, they don't want to be involved, but they try to be involved between the Saudis and the Iranian. So it's much bigger than just looking at Lebanese borders or even Middle Eastern borders. And what will happen with the American elections, right?
Yes.
Exactly. Actually, if you allow me to say just one word, people forget when Trump was in power. So first of all, we had Obama, and Obama for when the war was ongoing in Syria, and Bashar al-Assad used chemical weapons against his people, and Obama said that Bashar al-Assad crossed the red line, but nothing happened. But when Trump came to power, I remember it was, I don't know if exactly the months, but it was sometimes in 2018, he attacked Syria, sent some missiles to Syria, and that kind of sent a strong message to Bashar al-Assad. And we did not see, or at least we did not hear about atrocities committed by Bashar against his people since. So, and again, Trump also was very strict with the sanctions on Iran, decreasing Iranian exports to 500,000 barrels a day, which is the lowest that Iran had seen under as long as the sanctions were in place. But when the Biden administration came to power, they turned a blind eye to the reinforcement of the sanctions on Iran, and Iran has been exporting record levels of oil, and that gives them revenues, and that allows them to fund their own military, but also their proxies in the region. So that's why I like to bring in the outcome of the US elections, because that will also have an impact on the dynamics in the region.
But just finally, if for example, Trump were to win, and it's pretty much 50-50, it's pretty much 50-50, you'd be a fool to call it at this stage. What does Trump allow or disallow the Israelis to do? We have seen what Joe Biden is very ineffectual with the Israelis. In a way, Netanyahu has played him like a fiddle, it seems to me, and it seems to a lot of people. Basically, Biden says, don't do that, and yet now he just goes ahead and does it all the time. Explain to me what Trump does with Netanyahu. What do you think that relationship would look like?
If I base my judgment only on the current rhetoric of Trump during his campaign, I would be really, really worried, because I have the impression that he's going to give the green card to Netanyahu to occupy the whole of Lebanon. But the reality is going to be different, because we have to also bring into the equation yet another set of players, the GCC countries. Saudi Arabia playing an important role, Qatar, even the UAE, in the internal dynamics of political fragmentation in the country, supporting the Sunnis and also not sending money as they used to, for example, to the country. And if I highlight one key difference, in addition to the role impact on Iran, one key difference between the Biden administration and the Trump administration is the relationship between the US and the GCC, particularly Saudi Arabia. So yes, Trump may have better relationship with Netanyahu, but also than Biden, but also Trump had much closer relationship with Saudi Arabia than the Biden administration. Because don't forget, Biden said that he was going to turn Saudi Arabia into pariah state before he was elected. And then he went all the way to ask them to pump more oil. And the Saudis, refused to do that. So it's not clear cut that Trump would give the green card to Netanyahu to do whatever he wants. I think what Trump would try to do is perhaps push for a peace deal between Saudi Arabia and Israel, and building on the relationship that he had with both players.
So, Carole, just before you go, can I ask this final question? If we had been talking here, let's say 5, 10, even 5 years ago, and we had highlighted all the conflicts, all the killing, all the occupation, all the military, everything that we've just seen, right? The fragility. I would have said the price of oil will be through the roof. Why have we not seen a massive reaction in commodity prices and oil prices to this completely chaotic, disastrous, dangerous, apocalyptic underlying political and military situation?
If you were an energy veteran like me, I've been watching, oil industry from the 1800, how it has evolved, then you wouldn't be surprised because oil markets have changed tremendously from the 70s till today. But just to keep it very simple for our listeners, that in the 70s, OPEC dominated oil supplies. So they were more than 50% of global supplies came from OPEC, primarily from the Middle East. You had also oil was so important to global economy, and it was the most important provider of energy, also providing more than 50% of our global energy needs. Then there were several shocks after the other, with prices skyrocketing and staying high for a long time. And when you have this kind of price reaction, over time, consumers look for alternatives. And this is where natural gas became more popular. We started to depend less on oil, but also we saw development of oil coming from elsewhere. And today, the biggest producer of oil is not Saudi Arabia. So the oil industry has changed so profoundly since the 1970s, and we have not seen disruptions from the Middle East. We saw lots of supply coming from elsewhere. And that's why oil prices have ignored the developments in the Middle East. But if the Middle East explodes, then it's a different story. But so far, we are pretty safe when it comes to oil supplies.
Carole Nakhle, thank you so much.
Great talking to you.
That was an amazing insight into Lebanon. And as you said before, the patchwork of Lebanon, but from a Lebanese person and a Lebanese woman. It's fascinating. But one of the really interesting points that I picked up from her was when she was talking about the diaspora and the fact that most of the good, clever, well-educated people leaving the country in the hands of people who aren't quite qualified to run a country. And hence you have corruption and all sorts.
Well, the Lebanese diaspora is anywhere between 5 and 14 million people, right? Internally, the Lebanese population is just over 4 million. So they have it's sort of slightly, not analogous to, but similar story to the Irish abroad, right? The fascinating thing about the Lebanese diaspora is they are unbelievably wealthy. They're unbelievably wealthy outside of Lebanon. Carlos Slim, once the richest man in the world, the richest man in Mexico.
Right.
A huge, huge footprint in particularly Latin America. Huge footprint. And amazingly, if you go to Argentina, they refer to all the Lebanese, Syrians, Lebanese, anyone from that region as, they just call them all Turks, which I find hilarious. They just go, she's a Turk, he's a Turk, right? Basically, you had massive migration from Lebanon literally over the last 150 years.
Why did they head there?
Because Latin America was the land of opportunity. If you think about it, that's why the Italians went there. That's why the Spaniards conquered it, but the Italians went there. That's why loads of Jews went there. In the early 20th century. Yeah. That's why, Argentina has one of the largest Jewish populations in the world. It's about 300,000 or 400,000. It's and a huge Lebanese diaspora. All the Lebanese were, and it comes from the Phoenician history, that these people were traders. They were traders in the Ottoman Empire. They were traders when they had their own country. And of course, their country has been buffeted between, basically, it was taken over by France after the Ottoman Empire, when basically the Brits and the French in Sykes-Picot divided up the Middle East. The French got Syria and Lebanon. And again, many Lebanese people speak this very strange hybrid of Arabic and French together, which is again a weird. So they're equally comfortable in French, Arabic, particularly the older generation. And of course, the younger generation speak English. But what I think is fascinating there, she touched on, and we're going to talk about it maybe in the next podcast, but maybe one of the ones coming up, John, about that American relationship, Trump and Biden, who's better, who's worse in the region for not just the Lebanese, but for the whole area. So you've just heard Carole there. She's going to be at Kilkenomics. Get tickets for her gigs, kilkenomics.com, because again, John, it is always essential to get local testimony. I live there. My brother lives there. My mother lives there. This is the world we see. And that to me is as valuable as 10 analysts from abroad. So we talk to you next time.
So we're back with another Schumpeter slot and our collaboration with An Post. Today, we're shining a spotlight on how An Post's Advantage card is helping businesses across Ireland thrive with offering savings, convenience and efficiency.
And joining us today is Designist, a Dublin-based company that's known for its innovative product designs and creative consultancy work. Designist creates products that combine function with design thinking, making them stand out.
We'll be chatting with them about how the An Post Advantage card has supported their business, whether it's through savings on postage or streamlining their day-to-day logistics.
Now, I'm talking to Jenny Flynn of a shop that has always grabbed my attention, but I have never got into it. So this is our chance to talk about Designist. Tell me about Designist, Jenny. Where did you get the idea?
Thank you very much for having me on. I'm absolutely delighted to be having a chat with you. So we set up in 2010. It was the week that the IMF came to Ireland.
Expertly timed.
It was a brilliant time to set up in business, I have to say, because we got so much positivity from everybody. They were like, oh, you're so brave. And we were able to make all of our mistakes without anyone noticing too much. But before that, as we were talking about, I actually was a kitchen designer. I was high-end fitted furniture. And for years, I'd been saying to people, what you want to do is a neutral kitchen and then add some very colourful accessories to it so that when you feel like a change, you don't have to change the entire thing. You can just add a bit of different colour, add something a bit seasonal to it. And then a lot of the customers were coming back to me saying, but where do I get these things? So I had a background in product design and I knew a lot of designers who didn't have an outlet. So those two things kind of came together and we decided we were going to open a shop.
So tell me, what are you selling? Because this is what the idea. You're selling ideas, you're selling, you're getting into people's heads in a way, which is, I think, is lovely.
Yeah, so from the beginning, it was, we thought we were going to be a design shop, which doesn't really exist in Ireland. It's kind of like when you go to Amsterdam, you walk into their beautiful interior shops. There are interior shops here for sure, but not design shops in the same way. But it very quickly discovered that we were actually a gift shop, because that's what people want, is they want a product with a story that they can hand over to somebody else and see their eyes light up.
Isn't this what you're kind of selling? You're kind of selling that moment where people open up a present and somebody's beside them, the people who give the present, and there's that kind of mutual thing. Oh my God, you get me. Fantastic. I've always wanted this. You've actually preempted me.
Yes. This looks and feels like something I might already own, but I just didn't know existed yet.
So in terms of the business itself, right, because the IMF have just come in. There's no money in the country. People are in debt. What are the sort of tools that you've used, or the ideas that you've actually said, okay, these sort of tricks have helped us along the way?
The biggest one is listening to the customer. Anything you want to know, they will tell you. So like we sell a lot of notebooks, because the third customer that came in and said, I want a dotted notebook. And I was like, I don't know what's going on here. And it was that they wanted to start bullet journaling, but I didn't know what that was. But a customer led us towards that. And then we have sold thousands of notebooks. Similarly, there was a stage when everyone was coming in saying, can I have an alarm clock? Which we couldn't have sold for years, because it was the kind of beginning of people wanting this kind of wellness trend that's evolved. It was the beginning of people not wanting to have their phones in their bedrooms with them. And that's kind of just gone out in all kinds of different directions. So that was the biggest tool, is listening to the customer. And then I guess alongside that is picking the right partners to work with.
Yeah. Now, in terms of working with An Post, in terms of, for example, you were saying to me, like all businesses, between now and Christmas is a massive, massive time. And you've got to get the product out to people. And
it's not just the getting it out, I guess, as well. It's for us, it's about the customer. It's when they see that that parcel is coming with An Post, they relax about it. Like, we've worked with An Post since the very beginning. So in 2008, when they kind of came up with the idea of an Advantage card, that's what we use with them at the minute, which is where we get money off buying all of the An Post things that we need, so that they deliver the parcels. And that just means that we can be really competitive, because even though people like to shop online, nobody likes to pay delivery fees. It's a real barrier to people.
So Jenny, in your experience, now you guys have done extremely well. It's a great partnership with An Post. Should others be looking at them now?
Definitely. Because I think the difference with working with An Post is they're thinking about your business, not just about their own.
Well, that's a pretty good recommendation. We'll leave it there. Jenny Flynn of Designist, it has been an absolute pleasure.
Thanks a million. Bye.
That was a great chat. And again, I must be getting some, off-the-shelf advice, John, on kitchens. I might end up, amazingly, after all these years, being regarded as tasteful.
You, Mark, that would be a first. Anyway, the An Post Advantage card's financial benefit, like savings on postage, really do add up. And the operational efficiencies, like time saved on postal services, are key for businesses looking to grow.
So you can find out more or sign up for a card today at onpus.com/advantage card.
So join us next time on the Schumpeter slot with An Post.